My name is Patricia Virakun, and I want to talk to you today about talking sex to your children, and if there are grandparents out there, to your grandchildren, or to aunties and uncles out there, to your nieces and nephews. Talking sex, talking sexuality to children in a sexualized cyber generation. Firstly, who are these children we are talking about? Demographically speaking, your kids are either littlies, these are the ones born 2010 and after, so the ones who are less than 12 years of age. And trust me, they're not innocent little babes anymore in the world they're living in. Or your teens and young adults. The little ones are called Alpha, Generation Alpha. And the older ones, the teens, are called Gen Z. But that really doesn't make a difference. Children today are exposed to a culture which says, I need to look inward to my feelings, to find my self, my authentic self, and my desires. And once I found these desires and this authentic self, I have to live them out. Living my desires, fulfillment of my desires is a necessity for contentment and for happiness. My body, my very physical body, becomes something malleable to my feelings. And sex becomes something to be used, a commodity for my desires, for my self-gratification. And my sexuality, which is part of my feelings, becomes my very identity. I am my desires. You see, this means I follow my heart. And so I can have sex with whomever I want to, as long as there's some form of consent. And because it's about my feelings, who says I have to wait till marriage? I have to fulfill my desires. And pornography, who are you to tell me it's harmful? Love is love. So if you love, you need to have sexual intimacy. On the other hand, love is love. So if you love me, you will affirm whatever my behavior is. And sexual activity becomes a necessity to happiness and fulfillment. This is the culture you, as parents, are bringing your children up in. Some of you may be sitting there going, hey, wait a minute, is this really my responsibility? What about school? What about the church? Let somebody else do it. Really? You Christians listening to this, it is your responsibility. You are Christ's ambassadors in your children's life to guide them, to guard, to teach. See, you can't, it's not that you're trying to produce these good little kids. You impress on them the godliness that is a God-given choice. Your lives show them what godliness means, and then you impress it on them. You talk to them, you show them sex education is caught far more than taught. And you start early, as it says in Proverbs 22. You start children off, start. Even when they are old, they will stay with it. You see, if you don't do it, they're going to hear from their friends, or they're going to hear from pornography. So I want to talk to you about three little things, and then we'll take a little break, come back and do some practical pointers. Firstly, the importance of teaching your children and you understanding it yourself, the vulnerability of a child's brain. Secondly, the importance of identity in today's world, where identity is about finding it inside yourself, and how this all applies to sex. Let's start with the brain. Your children have what we call a developmental dissonance in their brain, and their brains are incredibly neuroplastic. So for some of you, you understand it. Some of you are wondering, whoa, what's this all about? What do I mean by this? Firstly, the young brain from childhood to about the mid-20s is a time of very rapid development. Connections in the brain are very rapidly forming and reforming. It's like a continuing computer upgrade. Now, this is biological, but it is very dependent on what is fed into the brain. So, if you feed your brain, especially a developing brain, good and healthy input, the brain circuits will absorb that and set pathways and values and attitudes in keeping with it. The Apostle Paul in Philippians 4:8 said that whatever is good and pure and wholesome and healthy, think about these things. We just give it a name. We call it neuroplasticity. The brain works, especially the developing brain, on a use it or lose it principle. Do you know what your kids are feeding their brain? What YouTube channels are they watching? What influencers are they following? Do you know? Do you know what's on their phone? What apps are on their phone? You need to be a social media mentor. You need to be there. You need to be talking to them. You need to find out what's on the phone. I tell parents, you need to tell your children, if there's something on your phone and you don't want me to see it, it shouldn't be there. Particularly if they're under 14, 15, they've no real discernment. Now, there's a lot more to that, but let's move on. For this developmental dissonance. When your kids hit puberty, the emotional brain goes into overdrive. I say it's like that red Ferrari on steroids. And this leads to this wanting to be independent, a wanting for identity of their own, to look away from the family and find their own tribe in their peer group, of course. And now in social media. Independence, identity, risk-taking, and finally sexuality bubbling in the brain. This is the emotional brain. It's part of growing up, and it's a good part of growing up. So what's the problem? It's that the control brain, that which is here in the frontal lobes, don't mature till the mid-20s. I repeat, emotional brain erupting at puberty, and puberty ages are dropping, and self-control, cognitive thinking, not developing till mid-20s. Well, not developing, not maturing till mid-20s. What do we have? When I talk to young people, I say you're like a red Ferrari on steroids, accelerated to the floor, hardly any brake pedal, and no positioning system, no GPS, control brain still developing. Parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, church. You are that GPS. You are the ones who can help children develop self-control. You are the ones who need to be talking to them early. You are the ones who can guide them. Don't abrogate that responsibility to their friends, to social media, or even to pornography. You take the responsibility. Moving on to identity. Identity is probably one of the most important issues in children as they grow. Who am I? Whose am I? Who says so? Am I whatever society says? Do I have to look into myself and somehow in some magical way find out who I am? Is it that I am my body? Do I look at social media, what we call a comparator social culture, and find that image and say, that's what I should be like? That pouty image, pouty image that says, this is who I am. I need a better, I don't know, shredded abs or whatever, selfie or whatever, thigh gap or something. And that's what I need. Or going through puberty and going, ew, I don't like what's happening in my body, and being not sure about it. The body is that what gives identity. But even more in our culture today, these inner feelings that drive identity. So sexuality in this time when the brain is just developing and it's 5 times at least more receptive to the whole, dopamine-induced pornography and violence input that's so common in social media. Sex becomes an identity, and gender fluidity, finding that gender label among the 100 or so that's out there floating in social media, or sexual activity becomes something that gives me identity. Or is there something else? Is it searching internal to find that authentic identity that only I can find and then somehow put it out in social media? Or is it about my family and my culture, and that's a good identity? Or is it something above that that's even better, something given that we don't have to earn? But dear parents, grandparents, ambassadors of God and Christ in your children's lives, your children are created by God. Yes, we are fallen human beings. Yes, we are broken human beings. Therefore, your children are not perfect, neither are you. But we are created in the image of God. You need to have your children understand that there is no us and them. We are all created in the image of God. We are chosen even before creation, and we are known by God. I tell young people, Psalm 139, King David said, you, God, knit me in my mother's womb. Mommy and daddy, I tell young people when I talk to them, were not knitting. They were having great sex. It is okay to talk to your children about this, but God knew you when you were one cell. That's exciting. Talk to your children about this, that God actually sent his son. He came down and died to redeem your body. Your body, therefore, has significance. It has value. It has dignity because God says so. Not because social media says so. Not because your friends say so, but because God says so. And you can go to God and say, my Father. You see, the body belongs to Jesus, belongs to God. We read in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, your body is part of Jesus's body. Your body is the home of the Holy Spirit. Honor God with your body. Honoring has to do with respect and loving. Teach your children to honor their body. Honoring their body, they will never send a nude to someone or ask someone for a nude because it is not honoring to do so. Have you taught your children? All this in the context of God's family. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm not a parent, that is not a cop out. You are an auntie, you are an uncle, you're a grandparent to every child in your church. You are part of the family. You have a role in nurturing children. So we've looked at this. It's so important we remember this. And I'm going to take a few moments here to just allow you to think about these and maybe think, are there any questions about the brain and identity? When we come back, we'll talk about sexuality. And then we'll talk about some practical tips of dealing with issues that come up in sex education. So I'll give you a few minutes now to have a bit of a chat and talk and maybe come up with some questions. And I'll come back in a few minutes and we'll continue this conversation.